They finally found you, not in some far off future, not in a maybe someday, not in a we'll see you. Right now, today, and I need you to actually sit with that sentence for a second before you scroll past it. Because when I say found, I don't mean some vague energy. I'm about to hand you and let you fill in the blanks yourself. I mean the actual weight of what's been missing your whole life is about to come into focus right here. In the next few minutes, while you're sitting there with your coffee going cold and your phone propped up against something on the counter, because here's the truth nobody has said to you plainly yet. You were never actually from where you thought you were from. Not in blood, not in bearing, not in the way you carry yourself through a room without even trying. You're the lost royal child, the one they have been searching for. And the search, the actual search, is finally over. Stay with me because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why the door that was always locked is about to open and why it's opening now. Not 5 years from now, not someday. Now, let me paint you a picture because I want you to actually feel this, not just hear it, somewhere in a place you have never seen, with your own eyes. There is a room, old wood, old stone, the kind of quiet that only exists in places that have been waiting a long time for something. And in that room, there is a letter, sealed in wax, pressed with a crest that hasn't been broken open in years, addressed not to a name, but to a bloodline, to whoever carries it, to whoever was born with it, already living underneath their skin, whether they ever knew it or not. For a long time, that letter just sat there. Nobody touched it. Nobody dared, because opening it meant admitting something had been lost. And admitting loss means admitting fault. So it sat in the dark, collecting dust, gathering years, while you, the actual heir, the actual reason that seal exists at all, were out here, living a life that never quite explained itself to you. A life where you always felt one size too formal for the room you were standing in. Where you carried yourself with a stillness people couldn't quite place. Where even as a child, grown adults would look at you a little too long, like they were trying to remember where they'd seen you before. That wasn't your imagination. That was recognition trying to happen too early, before the world was ready to state it out loud. Here's the thing about people who are actually royal in the way that matters. The way underneath paperwork and titles and old family portraits. They don't announce it. They don't need to secure people. People who are exactly who they are all the way down don't have to perform importance. You never performed it. You just were it. Quietly. Every single day without a crown on your head, without a single person ever explaining to you what you were actually carrying, and that quiet unclaimed weight, that's exactly what made the letter start to matter again after all this time. Because somewhere, someone with old blood and older guilt started asking questions they had buried for years. Where did the child go? What became of the line everyone agreed? Very conventionally to stop discussing at dinner. And once that question got asked out loud, even once, even quietly in a room with the door closed, it could not be unasked again. That's when the search actually started. Not with fanfare, not with an announcement, with a single uncomfortable question that somebody finally had the nerve to say out loud after years of silence. Maybe in your story, this shows up as a family that always felt slightly incomplete. Like there was a name nobody sat at dinner, a chair nobody sat in, a photograph that got quietly moved to a drawer instead of a wall. Maybe it's a grandparent who got strangely quiet. Anytime the subject of before came up, who changed the subject a little too fast, a little too practiced. Maybe it is a certain document that was supposedly lost in a fire or water damage or just misplaced. Maybe it is a certain relative who left the country decades ago and never really explained why. And now nobody ever asked twice. Maybe it's simpler than any of that. Maybe it's just a feeling, one you had since you were young, that you were raised right, loved even, genuinely loved, but never quite told the whole story of where you actually came from. Maybe it even shows up in smaller, stranger ways. A birthmark that someone once commented on and then never mentioned again. A middle name that doesn't match anything else in the family tree, that nobody ever explained where it came from. A photograph from decades ago where you swear you can see the shape of your face looking back at you. From a stranger who shares none of your recorded ancestry. None of that is nothing. All of with is threat, and threat followed far enough always leads somewhere. I want to name something directly because it deserves to be said without flinching. You have spent a long time feeling like you didn't fully belong anywhere. Not in a dramatic, tragic movie kind of way, just a quiet, persistent sense of being slightly out of place, like you were speaking a dialect nobody else in the room quite understood. Even when they loved you, even when they meant well, you wondered more than once if something was wrong with you for feeling that way when everything on paper looked completely fine. You sat in rooms full of people who were technically your family and felt underneath all the warmth a strange kind of distance you couldn't name and definitely couldn't explain to anyone without sounding ungrateful. Nothing was wrong with you. That feeling of not quite fitting was never a flaw, and it was never ingratitude either. It was a memory your body kept even when your mind had no facts to hang it on, yet it was the echo of a room you belonged in long before you ever learned its name. What felt like being out of place was actually the exact opposite of what it looked like. You were the wrong size for a small room. Not because you were too much, but because you were built quietly, patiently for a much bigger one. And here is the part that unsettles the people who kept that letter sealed for so long. They did not lose the bloodline by accident. On some level, someone made a choice, whether out of fear or shame or a desire to protect a smaller, safer version of the family story, to let the truth stay quiet, year after year, generation after generation, if it had to, because the truth once it's out means somebody has to give something up, a title, a seat at the table, a version of the story where they were the whole picture instead of a placeholder standing in for someone who hadn't been found yet. Secure people do not need to erase anyone to feel whole. Confident people don't spend decades managing a narrative that requires someone else to stay invisible. It's only the ones who are afraid of being replaced, afraid of being revealed as smaller than the story they built, who worked that hard for that long to keep a single door shut. And the fact that so much energy went into keeping this quiet for so many years, that's not evidence. You were never real. That's the clearest evidence there is that you were the one thing they could never quite afford to let be found. Now let's talk about what's actually happening on their sides of things right now because it matters. And I don't want to skip past it. Whoever has been sitting on this truth, whether it's one person or a whole tired old family structure built entirely around not talking about it, they are not sleeping easy anymore. There is a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from holding a secret for years, checking it, guarding it, telling yourself the same careful story so many times that you almost start to believe it yourself. And then slowly, quietly, the stories start developing cracks it never had before. A relative asks a question they can't fully answer without stumbling. A record surfaces that doesn't quite match the version they've been repeating at every holiday. A resemblance gets pointed out once, offhandedly, at exactly the wrong dinner, and the whole table goes a little too quiet or a little too long. They thought the door would stay shut forever. They built their whole sense of safety around that assumption. They did not build a plan for the possibility that the truth simply keeps existing. Whether or not anyone ever gets around to opening the letter, truth doesn't need permission to be true. It just waits patiently, the way it always has. For the moment, it becomes impossible to keep managing around, and now, in private moments they don't talk about, they are running the math, wondering what happened when the seal finally breaks, wondering if you'll come back angry, demanding, dramatic, and honestly, that would almost be easier for them because at least it would be a story they know how to handle. What actually terrifies them is the other possibility that you come back already whole, already steady, already built entirely on your own without needing a single thing they have to offer that you don't need to crown to feel complete because you already learned how to hold yourself like royalty long before anyone told you. The word applied to you. Picture the specific moment it finally catches up to them. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a scene, nothing like what plays out in a film, just a quiet unraveling thread by threads. Someone lying awake at 3 in the morning replaying a decision they made decades ago that felt justified at the time and feels smaller and meaner every year that passes. Someone realizing slowly that every year they spent managing the silence was a year they spent building their entire identity on top of a foundation they knew somewhere underneath wasn't solid. That kind of realization doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the chest like something swallowed too fast and it doesn't leave. While all of that has been happening quietly on the rent, something very different has been happening on yours, and I want you to really see this because you probably never laid it out and to end like this. You have not been sitting around waiting for someone to hand you a title. You've been building that day after day without an audience, without applause, without anyone standing at the edge of your life narrating how impressive it was. You've been learning how to carry yourself with steadiness even on the days nobody was watching. Learning what it means to be trusted, to be looked to in a room, to be the person other people quietly orient surrounds long before anyone ever explained to you why that came so natural. That is not a coincidence, and it was never luck. That is exactly what royal bearing actually looks like. When it has nothing left to prove, it's not velvet, it's not gold thread, it's not a portrait hanging in a hallway, it's discipline, it's groundedness. It's the kind of presence that makes a room settle a little when you walk into it. Even if nobody there could tell you exactly why that happens, think about the specific moments where this has already shown up in your life. Whether you noticed at the time or not, the way people have occasionally deferred to you without either of you quite understanding the reason the way conflicts sometimes seems to resolve themselves. The moment you walked into a space, not because you did anything dramatic, but because your presence itself changes the temperature of the room. The way strangers have sometimes treated you with an odd kind of instinctive respect you never asked for and never had to earn through performance. That's not random. That's blood remembering itself before the paperwork ever caught up. And it isn't only distant relatives or dusty family records where this shows up. Sometimes it's smaller than that, closer than that. A stranger in a checkout line who calls you ma'am or sir with a strange, unearned formality. A coworker who defers to your opinion in a meeting before you even fully finish the sentence. A room that quiets just slightly the moment you walk into it. For reasons nobody in that room could actually explain if you asked them directly. None of that is nothing. All of it is the same thread showing up in 100 small, ordinary places long before the letter itself ever gets opened. There is another piece of this worth naming to you, the quieter cost of it. Carrying yourself with that kind of steadiness for years without anyone explaining why it came so easily to you. Is its own kind of loneliness. You probably had moments of wondering whether you were simply too serious, too composed, too much somehow when everyone around you seemed to move through your life a little lighter, a little less careful, that weight was never a flaw in you. It was the specific gravity that comes from carrying something real. Long before you had a name for what it was, people who carry nothing don't feel heavy. You were never carrying nothing. I also want to speak to something a lot of you are probably already sensing but haven't said out loud, even to yourself. Somehow you have noticed that certain people in your life have started treating you slightly different lately, in small, hard to pin down ways, a little more careful around you, a little more attentive when you speak, a little less willing to talk over you the way they used to. That shift is not your imagination. And it's not because you change how you dress or how loud you talk. It's because something underneath the surface has already started to move. And people feel that kind of shift before they can explain it. They can't name what changed. They just know the room feels different when you're in it's now. And here is the part I want you to real here. Underneath everything else, this was never actually about a piece of paper. The letter, the seal, the bloodline, none of that is what makes something true. It's confirmation of something that was already true the entire time. Whether or not anyone had opened the envelope yet, you were never waiting to become the lost royal child. You already were every single day you didn't know it. Every single day you carried yourself well without a reason to. The only thing that's actually changing now is that the people who buried the truth are finally, after all this time, running out of places left to hide it. So let's talk about timing because I know that's the part you're really here for. This is not 5 years away. This is not some distant, hazy someday maybe. The seal is already cracking. Small things are already surfacing. Conversations that used to get shut down the moment they came up are starting to happen anyway. Awkwardly, incompletely, but happening. Questions that used to get deflected with a change of subjects are starting to actually get answered. Even partially, even reluctantly, even through graded theater. Pay attention to small, strange coincidences. Round names, old photographs, turning up out of nowhere, unexpected messages from distant relatives, you haven't heard from in years, documents that surface in places they were never supposed to be found. That's not decoration. That's not your imagination working overtime. That's confirmation. And when the moment actually comes, when the letter is finally opened and the truth is finally said out loud in a room full of people who spent years pretending it didn't exist, I don't want you to brace yourself for chaos. I want you to notice when it happens how unbothered you already feel underneath the surface because you were never performing for that moment. You were never holding your breath, waiting for someone else's permission to become whole. You were building a whole, complete life in the meantime, one that stands entirely on its own, with or without a crown ever getting attached to it. Whatever it looks like when it finally happens, whether it's quiet and private or louder than anyone except it, I want you to remember this part especially. You don't need to make it a performance. You don't need to prove anything to people who spent years choosing not to see you clearly. The recognition, whenever it arrives, is not the thing that makes you real. It never was. It's simply the moment the outside world stops lagging behind a truth your own life has been quietly proving for years. That's the real inheritance, and I want you to really let that land, not a title, not land, not property, not a family. Finally admitting out loud what they should have said years ago. The real inheritance is the version of you that grew up steady, grounded, and whole without ever needing their permission to become it. They can open that letter whenever they finally find the courage to. You already read it a long time ago, in the only place that ever really mattered, in how you carry yourself when no one else is watching, in the way you never once needed a crest stitched into anything to know your own worth. You are the lost royal child. Not lost anymore. Honestly, never actually lost at all. Not for any one single day. Just waiting quietly, patiently. Anyone deserved from you, from the rest of the world to finally catch up to what you already knew about yourself this entire time. So don't spend the next chapter of your life waiting by the door for someone else to hand you the letter. Don't slow your own momentum to watch them finally admit what took them this long to say. You were never walking toward their recognition. You were always walking toward yourself. And that path has never once needed their permission to be real. Keep building exactly the way you have been, quietly, steadily, without an audience, because that is the very thing that made this true in the first place, long before anyone went looking for you. They finally found you, and now, finally, after all of it, they have